James, I didn't want you to know. Not yet. Her voice trembled in the pouring rain, and when he caught her collapsing into his arms, he saw it, her swollen belly, his child, and he had no idea. The billionaire's heart, once ice, shattered in an instant. Secrets, betrayal, love, all crashing in one night. What happens next will change everything. Don't blink. This story will leave you breathless. I'm so glad you're here. Tell me, where are you listening to me from today? And while you're at it, how would you rate my stories, out of 10? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. All right, let's not wait any longer. Let's dive in. Rain fell relentlessly, hammering against the black asphalt of the city streets, turning every puddle into a mirror of fractured neon lights that danced like fire and shadow across the wet surfaces. The storm was merciless, lashing down with a cold fury that mirrored the turmoil in James Vale's chest, though he did not yet know it. His sleek black car cut through the night like a phantom, tires hissing against the rain-slick roads, headlights barely piercing the fog that seemed to hover over the city like a cloak. Inside, James sat rigid, his tailored suit clinging uncomfortably to his damp skin, the night's meetings leaving his mind a battlefield of contracts, numbers and deals. Yet something in the air made his heart uneasy, a flicker he could not identify. Then, out of the rain-soaked blur of the street, a figure appeared, shivering under the flickering light of a lonely street lamp. Time seemed to freeze as James's eyes locked onto her. Sarah. His Sarah. The woman whose presence had haunted the quiet corners of his life since she had walked away, leaving only memories of love and betrayal behind. Her dark hair plastered to her face, her coat clinging to her form, the way she trembled violently, the hand pressed protectively over her swollen belly. It was as though the universe had dropped her into his path in this exact, cruelly perfect moment. Every memory he had tried to suppress came rushing back like a tidal wave, the warmth of her laugh, the tension of their fights, the sting of their separation, the nights he had regretted every harsh word and every cold glance. His chest tightened painfully, the air in the car suddenly thick, electric, as if the storm outside had entered with her. Without hesitation, he flung open the car door, water instantly soaking through the sleeves of his suit, cold dripping down his neck and into his hair, but he did not care. Each step toward her was urgent, frantic, propelled by something primal and undeniable. When she staggered, unable to keep her footing on the slick pavement, he caught her before she hit the ground, the impact of her collapsing body sending a jolt of fear through him. Her lips trembled, teeth chattering, and the quiver in her voice when she whispered, "James, I didn't want you to know." "Not yet," struck him like a bullet to the chest. The weight of the secret she had been carrying, hidden in the shadows of months and months, was suddenly tangible, and James could feel the echo of betrayal, of lost time, mingled with a fierce, raw surge of protective instinct that he had never experienced before. His hands, steady in the boardroom, shook as he pressed her to him, shielding her from the relentless rain, the chill biting through both of them. And yet, in his arms, she felt fragile, precious, almost unreal. Her eyes, wide and glistening with unshed tears, locked onto his, and in them he saw fear, relief, shame, and longing all intertwined. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to move, to take her somewhere safe, anywhere safe, but the city streets offered no refuge, only shadows and the relentless storm. The neon signs blurred into streaks of color, creating halos around her soaked form. And for a fleeting moment, James's mind raced with the impossible. How had she survived like this alone? How had she carried this burden for months without reaching out, without letting him in, without trusting him when he would have moved mountains for her? The thought alone was almost too much, a twist of anger and sorrow that made his heart ache, a sensation he had long thought dead. He felt her body shudder violently against his chest, the tiny movements of her hand over her belly stirring a longing he could not name. He could sense the life she carried, a secret kept in the deepest shadows of her courage, and that realization hit him harder than the rain pelting his shoulders. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice low, tight with barely contained emotion. The words trembled as they left him, betraying the icy control he had always maintained, and her lips quivered again, the faintest whisper of regret escaping her like a confession. Her fingers dug into his coat, clutching him as though he were the only anchor in a world that had turned upside down. James's mind spun with questions he didn't have the right to ask yet, 1,000 possibilities and fears intertwining. Had she wanted him to find her like this? Had she waited for him unknowingly, silently hoping he would appear in the rain at the exact moment her secret would no longer be hidden? Every second stretched unbearably, the storm outside echoing the tumult within him. A sudden gust of wind swept through the street, tearing at her soaked coat and sending a shiver through her that made James grip her tighter, pressing her body against his. The rainwater ran in rivulets along her face, mixing with the tears that had begun to fall. And in that moment he realized the enormity of what had been kept from him. His heart pounded with a mix of fury, longing, and helplessness as he lifted her slightly, cradling her like she might shatter, the secret she bore, pressing down on them both like the weight of the storm itself. Her voice broke again, almost inaudible over the roar of the rain. I thought you had moved on. I didn't want to. I couldn't." And James felt as if the world itself had tilted, the ground beneath him threatening to vanish. He held her closer, ignoring the chill, the rain soaking them to the bone, feeling every tremble, every heartbeat, every tiny movement that tethered them to each other. In that single moment, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The night, the storm, her secret. It had all conspired to force a reckoning, and he could not, would not, turn away. The city around them was a blur of light and shadow, the distant sounds of thunder punctuating the silence of their private storm. James's mind raced, torn between disbelief and an almost unbearable swell of emotion that threatened to undo the icy armor he had spent years cultivating. He could feel every heartbeat of the life she carried, a pulse that seemed to echo his own, and the thought that he had been absent for all these months, unaware, ignited a fire of regret, so fierce it was almost painful. As she pressed herself closer, weak and trembling, he caught the faintest gasp escape her lips, and instinctively he whispered, "Hold on, Sarah. I've got you. You're not alone anymore." But even as the words left him, the storm seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if warning him that this was only the beginning of a night that would demand everything from them both. Trust, truth, and courage neither had known they still possessed. A sudden movement from the shadows, a flicker of something that could have been danger, made him tense, every muscle in his body ready to react. He held her tighter, scanning the empty street, heart hammering, aware that the world outside might intrude at any moment. But when he looked back at her, at the curve of her belly, the damp strands of hair plastered to her face, and the fragility of her expression, he realized that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside him. He had found her, yes, but the question remained, how long could they survive the storm of secrets, the weight of what had been hidden before it consumed them both? Her eyes met his, wide and frightened, searching for reassurance he wasn't sure he could fully give, and yet he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He would not leave her, not now, not ever. Every ounce of control, every carefully constructed wall was crumbling, melting away under the force of what she had revealed, and the knowledge of the life they shared, though hidden, could no longer be denied. He tightened his grip instinctively, feeling her shiver against him, and whispered again, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Not until you tell me everything." The rain continued to pour, the city lights streaking the night in a blur of reds, blues and golds, but for James Vale, The world had narrowed to the small, fragile figure in his arms, to the trembling whisper of her confession, and to the secret she carried that would change everything. And just as the thought crossed his mind that they might finally be able to face the truth together, another shiver, sharper, more violent than the last, ran through her body, and he realized with a jolt of fear that this night, the midnight shock, was only the beginning of a journey that would demand every ounce of their courage, trust, and love. 2. James's hands trembled slightly as he maneuvered through the slick, glistening streets, the windshield wipers slicing the rain in a relentless rhythm that echoed the pounding of his heart. Sarah rested against him, her body fragile and trembling, her soaked clothes clinging to her like a second skin, and he could feel the subtle rise and fall of her chest with every shallow breath. The weight she carried was delicate but insistent, a reminder of the life she had hidden from him, and it struck him with a force that made his fingers tighten around the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. The city blurred around them, neon streaks reflecting on the wet asphalt, but his mind was consumed entirely by the fragile woman in his arms and the secret she was about to reveal. Her lips moved, quivering, and he instinctively leaned closer, his ear near her whisper. "James, I didn't want you to know." "Not yet," she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. He felt the confession pierce him, sharp and sudden, igniting a storm inside that rivaled the one outside. Every instinct, every ounce of control he had maintained for years, seemed to crumble in the face of the truth she had carried alone. And then her words broke entirely. I'm pregnant. It's yours." The car seemed to shrink, the world outside fading into insignificance as he processed the enormity of her revelation. 7 months. She had carried his child for 7 months, hidden behind a veil of fear, uncertainty, and perhaps shame. Every missed text, every unanswered call, every lonely night he had spent haunted by her absence suddenly took on a new, unbearable weight. His chest tightened, a combination of disbelief, regret, and a fierce, protective longing. How had she endured this without him? How had she survived alone, afraid to reach out to the one person whose love might have made every moment lighter? James pressed a hand to his temple for a moment, trying to steady his thoughts, trying to force calm into the chaos raging inside him. But calm was impossible. The rain streaking down the windshield seemed to mirror his inner turmoil, blurring reality, turning the night into a wet, distorted reflection of what should have been, what might have been if he had known, if he had been there. He stole a glance at Sarah, her head resting weakly against his shoulder, eyes half closed, exhausted and vulnerable, and a surge of guilt tore through him so violently it was almost physical. He had been absent. He had failed her, and now he had to do everything to make it right. Every movement, every slight shiver from her body made his chest tighten further. The city's streets were dangerous, slick with rain, but he barely registered the road beneath them, his focus entirely on the small, fragile life he now knew was theirs. He stole a glance at her profile, at the curve of her belly beneath the damp fabric, and a strange, intense combination of awe and protectiveness surged through him. This was his child, his flesh and blood, a living testament to their love, their history, their connection that neither time nor distance could erase. And she had endured all this alone, hiding it from him, fearing he would not care, fearing he had moved on. The tension in the car was palpable, a quiet storm in itself. James kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other instinctively holding her, pressing her close to shield her from the relentless rain, from the world, from anything that might hurt her further. "Sarah," he began, voice low and tight, but she pressed a finger to his lips, shaking her head as if to warn him not to speak just yet. The moment was delicate, fragile, and he could feel the urgency in her every tremble, every shallow breath. She was not just hiding the secret of the child, but the fear, the loneliness, the nights of struggle she had endured without his knowledge. A flash of lightning illuminated the interior of the car, and for a split second, her eyes reflected in the glass, wide and fearful, glistening with unshed tears. The sudden burst of light made him flinch, as if the world outside was exposing her vulnerability to him in stark clarity. He felt the sting of regret in that moment, sharp and immediate. The months lost, the moments he could have shared, the chance to protect, to love, to reassure her. Now, every second mattered, every heartbeat was precious, and yet the weight of what had been kept from him made him question how they could possibly move forward. James spoke again, quieter this time, voice trembling despite his effort to maintain control. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The words hung between them, fragile and heavy, as if any sound might shatter the delicate balance of fear, relief, and longing in the car. Sarah's eyes fluttered open fully, meeting his, and he saw the mixture of emotions she had carried in silence for months. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear that he no longer cared. And in that instant, he understood fully the courage it had taken for her to finally reveal the truth, the trust she had placed in him even when he had been absent. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering the roof of the car, thunder rolling across the city like a warning. James felt the adrenaline spike, a combination of fear, responsibility, and overwhelming love. The streets ahead blurred beneath the windshield, but the road was secondary to the fragile woman in his arms, to the life she bore, to the fragile heartbeat that now intertwined with his own in a rhythm that demanded attention, devotion, and an unwavering promise to protect. He stole a breath, tasting the stormy air mixed with her scent, and the sheer intimacy of the moment pressed down upon him with the force of a tidal wave. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to drive faster, to get her somewhere safe, to wrap her in warmth, to shield her from everything, and yet the reality was that every decision he made could change the course of the night, could either protect or endanger them further. The tension was unbearable, electric, and he could feel the life inside her move slightly, a subtle kick that made his chest constrict with awe, terror, and something he could not yet name. She was fragile. She was theirs. And the consequences of each second, each moment, were immense. A sudden flash of movement from the corner of the windshield made him flinch, and his grip on the wheel tightened instinctively, muscles coiled, senses alert. But when he looked back at Sarah, her eyes half-lidded, lips parted slightly, the damp strands of hair sticking to her face, he knew with absolute certainty that nothing outside the car mattered more than this, than her, than the child she carried, than the secret that had finally been revealed. And yet, in that certainty, he also felt the weight of the storm still to come, the unspoken challenges of trust, healing, and the nights that would follow, when they would have to confront every hidden fear and every long-suppressed emotion. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to concentrate, to keep the car steady, to guide them through the rain-soaked streets. But his mind was consumed, eyes constantly flicking to her, feeling every tremble, every sigh, every heartbeat, aware that this secret, once hidden, now had the power to change everything, again. And just as the thought struck him that the night could not possibly grow more tense, Sarah shifted slightly, her hand brushing against his chest, fingertips grazing his heart, and he felt a surge of longing, fear, and determination so intense it nearly stopped his breath. She was vulnerable. She was his. And the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had just begun in the car, in their hearts, in their lives. 3. The elevator ride up to James Vale's penthouse was unbearably quiet, filled only with the steady hum of the building's machinery and the intermittent patter of rain against the glass exterior. Sarah leaned against him, her body weak and trembling. and he could feel the subtle shifts of her form as she tried to brace herself against his chest. Every movement she made sent ripples of awareness through him, the delicate proof of the life she carried pressing against him, tangible and insistent, a silent reminder of months lost, secrets kept, and trust strained. The weight of responsibility settled over him like a physical cloak, heavier than any suit of armor he had ever worn, yet impossible to set aside. As the elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, the warm golden light of his penthouse spilled out, cutting through the stormy darkness outside like a promise. He carried her through the threshold with careful deliberation, mindful of her exhaustion, the soaked fabric of her clothes still clinging to her, dripping onto the marble floors. Every step echoed in the spacious apartment, a quiet rhythm that seemed almost too loud against the soft roar of the storm beyond the windows. James laid her gently on the plush sofa in the living area, pulling blankets around her with a meticulousness born of both concern and reverence, as though he feared any careless movement might shatter her fragile composure. The smell of rain mixed with the lingering scent of her, damp hair clinging to her cheeks, and it struck him with a sharp pang of longing and regret. He brewed tea, the ritual mundane yet sacred in its purpose. Warmth, comfort, a symbol of the care he had long withheld, now finally tangible. He carried the steaming cup back to her, placing it carefully on the small table beside the sofa, his fingers brushing against hers briefly, the contact electric and grounding at once. Her eyes lifted to him, wide and fearful, searching, questioning, brimming with an uncertainty that tore at him in ways no business deal, no negotiation, no calculation ever had. "You're safe now, Sarah," he whispered, his voice low, breaking as if the words themselves carried the weight of every month he had spent away, every absence he had inflicted upon her. His own lips trembled despite his effort to maintain composure, and he watched her relax slightly against the blankets. Yet the shadow of fear remained in her eyes, the memory of abandonment clinging like a second skin. He wanted to tell her everything, to explain, to beg forgiveness for the years he had allowed distance and pride to wedge between them, but words felt insufficient, fragile against the enormity of what lay between them. She curled slightly, clutching her belly instinctively, and he noticed the subtle tremor that ran through her fingers, a silent plea for reassurance he had no right to deny. Her gaze flickered toward the window, at the rain hammering the glass in sheets, and he felt a surge of protective instinct so fierce it was almost frightening. He moved closer, sitting beside her, letting his shoulder support her back, his arm tentatively brushing hers, grounding her in the warmth of his presence. Every breath she took, shallow and careful, was a reminder of the delicate balance they now occupied, suspended between past mistakes and the fragile possibility of a shared future. James's mind raced as he watched her, the golden light of the penthouse casting soft shadows across her face, illuminating the faintest lines of stress and fear etched into her features. He thought of all the nights she must have spent alone, carrying a secret that had consumed her, that had bound her in a cage of uncertainty and isolation. The guilt of his absence pressed down on him, heavier than the storm outside, and he struggled to contain the flood of emotion that threatened to spill over. He leaned down, resting his forehead gently against hers, feeling the heat of her skin, the pulse of life beneath his touch, and for the first time in months he allowed himself to feel fully, without restraint, without calculation, without the cold armor that had always defined him. "James," she whispered, voice trembling, hesitant, as if speaking aloud might undo her fragile composure, might shatter the fragile bubble of safety he was trying to create around her. Her eyes glistened, reflecting both the interior light and the storm outside, a perfect mirror of the tumult in his chest. I didn't want you to see me like this. Weak, broken, alone." The words stabbed him, each syllable a reminder of the trust she had placed in him even in silence, the courage it had taken to finally surrender, to allow him to hold her when she had long carried so much alone. He shook his head, gripping her hand lightly, a gesture meant to anchor both of them. "You are not weak," he murmured, voice thick with a mixture of reverence and raw emotion. "You've survived far more than I ever imagined, far more than I deserved to know. And yet here you are, still standing, still alive, still ours." The words felt inadequate even as they left him, and he pressed a kiss to the top of her head, damp strands of hair brushing against his lips, a silent vow that he would protect her, no matter the cost, no matter the storm outside or the shadows within. Sarah exhaled slowly, shivering, and he instinctively tightened the blankets around her shoulders, wrapping her in warmth, safety, and an unspoken promise. The penthouse, with its opulent furnishings, soft lights, and panoramic view of the city, had always been a symbol of his control, his power, and his isolation. Tonight, it transformed into a sanctuary, a fragile haven against the violence of the storm outside and the chaos of emotions within. He realized that the walls, the luxury, the art, the high ceilings, all of it paled in comparison to the simple act of holding her, of seeing her alive and feeling the life she carried press against him like a heartbeat that demanded attention, protection, and unwavering love. The rain tapped against the windows with increased intensity, a reminder that the world beyond their walls was still relentless, still unforgiving, and yet, within the cocoon of blankets and soft light, James and Sarah found a fleeting peace. He noticed her eyelids droop, exhaustion threatening to pull her under, and he adjusted her position, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, brushing his fingers lightly across her cheek. She clutched his hand unconsciously, eyes closing for a moment, and he felt a mixture of relief, fear, and something unbearably tender rise within him. The child, the secret, the months of solitude, all converged in that fragile moment, a tension that balanced precariously between vulnerability and safety. A sudden creak from the balcony made both of them start slightly, a minor reminder that even sanctuaries were not impervious to intrusion. James's gaze flicked toward the source, muscles coiling instinctively, but the storm continued its relentless assault on the city outside, nothing more. Yet even in the absence of real threat, the tension lingered, a whisper of anticipation, a foreshadowing of challenges still to come. He returned his attention to her, brushing the damp hair from her face once more, and whispered, "You're safe, truly safe. I won't let anything hurt you, or the baby, not ever." Her fingers twitched in his palm, a faint tremor that spoke of exhaustion, relief, and lingering fear. He could feel her heartbeat, slow but steady, beneath his hand, and the life within her stirred faintly, a subtle nudge that made him inhale sharply. It was a reminder of the immense responsibility they now shared, the unspoken vow that they were no longer just two individuals caught in a storm of emotions. They were a family, tenuous, fragile, and yet impossibly connected. The thought struck him with force. He had failed her once, allowed absence and pride to dominate, but from this night onward he would not falter. As she leaned into him, weary and trembling, the warmth of her presence mingling with the blankets, James felt the walls of his cold, impenetrable heart shatter completely. The penthouse, once a symbol of power, now became the stage for something far greater. The tentative rebirth of trust, the fragile beginnings of love rekindled, and the silent promise that they would face whatever storms came, together. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the city for an instant, and in that flash he saw her face, serene yet vulnerable, and he knew with certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. But even in this fragile haven, tension lingered like a shadow across the soft golden light. The secrets she had kept, the months of solitude, and the life growing within her, the weight of it all remained, pressing silently against them. He had saved her from the midnight streets, yes, but now the true test had begun. Could trust be rebuilt? Could the fractured fragments of their past be reshaped into something whole? He held her close, tasting the faint scent of rain and hair, feeling her breath against his neck, and realized that every second of this night was a delicate balance between safety and vulnerability, peace and anticipation. 4. The penthouse was quiet, save for the soft patter of rain against the tall windows and the occasional distant rumble of thunder that rolled across the city like a reminder of the chaos left behind on the streets below. Sarah leaned into James, finally surrendering to exhaustion, her body trembling in the lingering warmth of the blankets he had wrapped around her. She had held herself together for so long, every breath a careful calculation, every thought a guard against exposing the vulnerability she had carried for months. But now, surrounded by the safety of his presence, the walls she had built began to crumble. Her tears, first tentative, then unstoppable, traced delicate paths down her cheeks, each drop a confession, each sob a plea that had been silenced for far too long. James held her as though she might shatter beneath his touch, his arms firm yet gentle, shielding her from the world and, in some small way, from herself. He could feel the subtle movement of life within her under his palm, the faint stirrings of the child they had created, and it hit him with a force that stole his breath. Every word she had held back, every secret she had kept, every lonely night she had endured. He felt them now, like tiny knives cutting through him, each one a combination of guilt, longing, and awe. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, letting his lips linger against her damp hair. A silent apology and vow rolled into one, yet he could not speak the full weight of what he felt. Words were insufficient, meaningless against the magnitude of the emotions thrumming between them. Finally, Sarah lifted her head slightly, eyes red and glistening, meeting his with a mixture of fear and need. "I didn't tell you," she whispered, voice trembling so delicately it was almost drowned by the rain. "I thought you had moved on. I didn't want to drag you into my life while you were cold toward me." The confession was soft, fragile, yet it carried the weight of months of isolation, of nights spent alone, of the quiet endurance of a secret she had carried so fiercely. Each syllable struck him like a blade and a balm at once, slicing through the layers of control and ice he had built around himself, while simultaneously filling him with a desperate, protective need to cradle her, to never let her go. His mind raced, torn between anger, guilt, and an overwhelming love that refused to be contained. He had been absent. He had allowed coldness to define their distance, to shape the void between them. And now he realized with crushing clarity the cost of that absence. And yet, as he held her close, feeling her body quake against his chest, he could not summon the anger to dwell on the past. There was only the present, raw and urgent, a fragile moment suspended between heartbreak and healing, and he would not allow it to slip away. James's fingers traced gentle patterns along her spine, each touch a silent promise, a careful attempt to soothe both her and himself. The room felt smaller somehow, the golden light and rain-blurred windows framing them in a bubble of intimacy and unspoken truths. He could feel her breath hitch, her sobs quieting just enough to catch fragments of her words, and he listened, every word a revelation, every pause a testament to the courage it had taken for her to finally release the burden she had borne alone. He leaned closer, lowering his forehead to hers, letting the rain-scented air mingle with the faint warmth of her hair, and whispered, "You've been carrying my heart, Sarah, and I never even knew it." Her tears soaked the front of his coat, dampening the fabric, but he did not pull away. Each drop was a reminder of the depth of her endurance, the power of the trust she had placed in him now, and the vulnerability she allowed him to hold. Her trembling hands found his, fingers clutching desperately at his sleeves, at his coat, as if anchoring herself to the only certainty in a world that had been storm-tossed for far too long. He could feel every subtle tremor of her body, every pulse, every quiet sigh of release, and it drove a surge of protective fire through him, a need to shield her from any harm, real or imagined. The storm outside seemed to respond, rain hammering the windows in wild bursts, thunder echoing in a way that mirrored the chaos inside them both. Each flash of lightning lit the room for an instant, illuminating Sarah's tear-streaked face, the curve of her lips as she tried to form words, the wet strands of hair clinging to her cheeks, and James felt himself fracture and rebuild simultaneously, the intensity of emotion too vast for a single heartbeat to contain. He pressed his lips again to her head, lingering, and the sound of her sobbing softened into quiet murmurs, a fragile symphony of release that echoed the storm outside. I was so afraid, she confessed, voice barely above a whisper, words trembling with every syllable. Afraid you wouldn't care. Afraid I'd lost you forever. Afraid that I couldn't bear to face your indifference if you knew the truth. Her head fell against his chest again, and he could feel her breath hitching in shallow, uneven waves, each one a delicate thread connecting her to him, tethering her to safety and warmth. James tightened his hold instinctively, pressing her closer, feeling the life within her stir again, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement that made his chest constrict with awe and fear. The weight of the months she had carried alone pressed upon him, suffocating in its intensity, yet he could not dwell on it. He needed her here, alive and safe, in his arms, and he needed to communicate what he felt without words that might fail him. His lips brushed the side of her neck, resting there for a heartbeat too long, drawing a shiver from her body, and he whispered again, low, deliberate, each word carrying both apology and promise. I am here. I am not going anywhere. Not now, not ever. And I will carry you and our child through every storm, every fear, every doubt. She pressed into him, exhausted, trembling, yet searching, as though seeking confirmation that the fragile truth she had revealed could indeed be trusted, that the man who had once been distant, cold, and unreachable could now hold them both without faltering. James could feel the tension in her fingers relax slightly, the tremor in her shoulders soften, but the fragility remained, a reminder that trust, once fractured, could not be rebuilt in an instant, no matter how fiercely they wished it to be so. Each blink, each shiver, each hesitant sigh was a thread in the tapestry of their fragile reconnection, delicate yet unbreakable if treated with care. Thunder rolled across the city, and for a moment it seemed to punctuate the gravity of the confessions being made, as if the storm outside were in dialogue with the storm of emotions within. James held her closer, pressing kisses into the damp strands of hair around her face, inhaling the scent of rain and faint perfume, and felt the weight of months of absence press down on him like a physical force. He would never allow her to feel alone again. The secret she had borne, the child she had carried, the pain she had endured, he would honor it all with unwavering devotion. Her voice, fragile yet resolute, rose again, words tumbling over one another in the way confessions always do, spilling fears and regrets in a torrent that seemed endless yet necessary. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I didn't know if you'd come back, if you'd care, if... Her voice broke entirely, and she buried her face against his chest, letting her tears soak his coat, as if each one could wash away the months of silence, the nights of loneliness, the fear she had held like a shield. James tightened his embrace, holding her as though she were the most precious and fragile thing in existence, because in that moment she was. The life she carried, the love she had sustained despite absence and coldness, the courage it had taken to finally release her burden, it all converged into a force that made him tremble, made his chest ache, made his heart break and swell in equal measure. The walls between them crumbled entirely, leaving only the raw, desperate connection of two people who had lost so much and now, at last, found a fragile path toward each other again. Even as her sobs quieted into intermittent hiccups and sighs, the tension lingered, a reminder that the road ahead was uncertain, fraught with both hope and risk. James rested his forehead against hers, fingers tangled in the damp strands of her hair, and whispered promises he knew he would keep. "I will not let anything tear you from me, from us, from this child. Whatever comes, whatever storms we face, I will hold you through it all." Her fingers tightened around his sleeve once more, a small but resolute acknowledgement, a silent promise that she too was ready to take the first tentative step toward healing, toward trust, toward the love that had never truly died but had only waited for the right moment to return. Outside, the storm continued, relentless and unforgiving, but inside, the penthouse, surrounded by blankets, warmth, and fragile confessions, James and Sarah began to rebuild something far greater than safety. They began to rebuild the bridge back to each other's hearts, one tear, one touch, and one whispered vow at a time. The rain had slowed outside, fading into a quiet drizzle, but the storm within James's penthouse had not yet abated. Days had passed since Sarah's confessions, yet every moment with her felt suspended in time, like they were navigating the delicate space between vulnerability and rediscovery. James had shed the last vestiges of his icy composure, the distance he once maintained for control, now meaningless in the presence of her fragile, breathtaking reality. He watched her carefully as she moved through the penthouse, the way her hand instinctively rested over her belly, the small tremor in her step, the careful way she avoided straining herself, and every gesture sparked a protective, almost feral response within him. He wanted to hold her, to shield her, to never let the world touch her again, yet he was painfully aware that he had no right to smother her with his newfound devotion. Their nights had become a slow dance of rediscovery, a tentative exploration of intimacy that extended beyond the physical into a deeper connection of hearts and souls. He would brush a strand of hair from her face, and she would lean into his touch, letting herself trust the warmth he offered without reservation. Her laughter, soft and hesitant at first, had begun to return, like a fragile bird testing its wings, and every note sent a rush of longing and relief through him, a reminder that love could heal even when hidden truths had cut deep. Their whispered conversations stretched into the late hours, a mixture of confessions, memories, and quiet promises, the soft cadence of their voices blending with the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows. Sarah, wary yet yearning, allowed herself to lean into him more with each passing day. Her trust, once tentative, now grew like fragile roots breaking through concrete, tentative yet insistent, demanding care, attention, and reciprocity. Every glance she cast his way lingered longer than before, every subtle touch, a brush of her hand against his arm, a fleeting press of her lips to his shoulder, fueled a fire that neither could resist. James felt it in the tightening of his chest, the quickened pulse when her hand grazed his, the ache in his bones when she nestled closer against him at night. He had known desire before, had wielded it as power, had kept it carefully contained. But this burning need, tempered by tenderness and respect, was entirely new, far beyond anything he had ever experienced. Their kisses, once stolen in moments of reckless urgency, now unfolded like careful explorations of every emotion they had denied themselves. He traced the line of her jaw with his lips, felt her shiver beneath his touch, and lingered in the taste and warmth of her skin. Every caress was an apology and a declaration, each whisper of "I love you," a brick in the fragile architecture of trust they were rebuilding together. Sarah's hands roamed over his chest tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, discovering the strength beneath the ice, the softness that had always existed but had been buried beneath pride and control. She murmured his name in the quiet moments before sleep, and he clung to her in response, needing to anchor himself to her in a way he had never allowed before. Yet the fire that burned between them was not without shadow. As their hearts began to heal, a storm approached, not from outside, but from the recesses of their past, the memories of separation, the guilt over absence, and the lingering fears that neither could fully voice. James could not deny the sharp pang of doubt that sometimes stabbed him when he looked at Sarah and thought of all she had endured alone. He questioned whether her trust would falter under pressure, whether the child she carried would complicate the fragile bond they were rebuilding, whether the ghosts of his own coldness might intrude upon the sanctuary they were slowly creating. Sarah felt it too, the subtle tremor beneath her ribs, the flutter of anxiety that rose each time James's gaze lingered too long, as if he were weighing her past, her fears, her secrets against some invisible scale of judgment. She wanted to surrender fully to the rekindled passion, to allow the love that had never truly died to consume her entirely, but a quiet whisper of doubt persisted. Could the man who had once left her feel fully present now? Could love survive when built atop months of hidden truths and silent suffering? The questions haunted her, a persistent shadow at the edges of every tender touch, every lingering kiss. Every evening, as they sat together on the sofa or in the quiet of the penthouse kitchen, sharing tea or whispered confessions, the tension hovered like an unseen spectre. James would sometimes catch himself staring at her belly, feeling the life growing inside her, and wonder how this child had changed everything, how it had altered his own understanding of love, responsibility, and the fragility of human connection. His chest would tighten at the thought of the weeks she had spent hiding her secret, the nights she had endured alone, and the courage it had taken to finally let him in. And yet, the intensity of the longing he felt for her, of the need to be near her, to hold her, to never let her go again, often pushed aside the shadows of doubt, replacing them with a heat that was equal parts desire, reverence, and desperation. Each touch, each caress, became a conversation without words, a negotiation between trust and desire, between fear and surrender. She would rest her hand over his heart and feel the rapid beat beneath her fingers, and he would lean into her touch, allowing the intensity of the moment to bind them in ways that neither had anticipated. When he kissed her, it was no longer about possession or lust. It was a reaffirmation, a recognition of all that had been lost and all that could now be reclaimed. Her lips, soft and trembling at first, yielded to his, and each kiss became a promise that they would face the storms ahead together, that they would honor the past without letting it dictate the future, that love, fragile yet indomitable, could survive even the deepest secrets. But even as their intimacy deepened, both could feel the tension of the unspoken, the memories that lingered in quiet corners of the penthouse. Each time James's fingers brushed her hair, each time Sarah pressed against his chest at night, a flicker of doubt passed between them, a silent question of whether the trust they had so tentatively rebuilt could endure the weight of the coming days. He would sometimes catch himself staring at her in the soft glow of the lamps, marveling at her strength, yet fearing that a single misstep could undo all they had gained. And Sarah, in turn, would press closer to him, feeling the warmth of his embrace, yet holding back just enough to preserve her own sense of autonomy, a subtle boundary shaped by months of loneliness and survival. The city beyond the penthouse remained a muted blur, neon lights reflecting softly against rain-streaked windows, but within their sanctuary, every glance, every whispered word, every tender gesture became amplified, charged with a tension that was both intoxicating and terrifying. They moved together through the penthouse as if choreographed by instinct, bodies brushing, hands finding each other in the quiet, yet always aware of the fragility beneath the passion. Nights stretched long, filled with whispers, touches, and tentative confessions, and each morning arrived with the quiet anxiety of wondering whether the intensity of the previous night could endure, whether the love they had rekindled could withstand the ghosts of absence and secrecy. Even mundane moments, Sarah leaning against him while he made tea, James watching her drink slowly to soothe the baby inside, the subtle brush of her fingers against his arm, became charged with meaning. Each gesture held weight, each movement carried a question, each sigh of contentment was tempered by the awareness that love, no matter how fierce, required constant attention, devotion, and courage. And in the quiet moments when they held each other, listening to the faint heartbeat of the child within her, they both understood that the road ahead would not be free of shadows, that trust and desire were delicate constructs, and that the fire they were building together could either warm them or consume them entirely. The tension was palpable in every touch, every whisper, every glance, and yet it was not entirely unwelcome. It was a reminder of the stakes, of the depth of the connection they were rediscovering, and of the undeniable reality that passion, love, and trust were inextricably intertwined. Sarah's body pressed against his in quiet repose, and James felt the heat of longing flare anew, a reminder that even as fears and past regrets lingered, desire, rekindled, tempered, and tempered again, could be a bridge between past hurt and future hope. But the shadows never fully lifted. A sudden silence, a slight hesitation in a word, a momentary flicker of doubt in her eyes, reminded him that this rekindled desire existed alongside fear, guilt, and the consequences of months of hidden truths. And yet, despite the uncertainty, despite the unspoken questions that hung in the air like mist over a darkened city, they pressed forward, discovering, learning, trusting, and igniting a fire that neither time nor distance had been able to extinguish. The storm within them mirrored the storm that had raged outside their penthouse weeks ago, the chaos, the fear, the exhilaration. But now it was tempered, transformed into a fire that was both dangerous and necessary. Every heartbeat, every sigh, every tremor of touch reminded them that love was not a simple journey, that passion and trust were often intertwined with risk, and that to embrace desire fully was to confront every hidden fear, every lingering shadow, every secret that had once threatened to pull them apart. And so, with every kiss, every touch, every whispered "I love you" shared in the quiet of their penthouse sanctuary, James and Sarah discovered that desire, when tempered by trust and fueled by love, could burn brighter than any storm, survive every shadow, and carve a path through even the most treacherous nights of the heart. Yet even as they embraced each other in passion and tenderness, the unspoken question remained, lurking like a spectre at the edge of every intimate moment. Could love truly endure when built upon secrets once hidden and truths so long concealed? The soft glow of the city lights through the penthouse windows had long since faded into the quiet hush of night, leaving the apartment steeped in shadows and the faint hum of the distant city. James lay beside Sarah, their bodies entwined in the fragile comfort they had rebuilt over days of intimacy and whispered confessions. The quiet was almost sacred, the kind that allowed a person to breathe freely, to feel the subtle rhythm of a heartbeat, and to hear the life that had quietly begun to grow between them. But even in the serenity of the night, James sensed the lingering tremor of unease beneath the surface of her sleep, a tension that he knew all too well, the echo of old fears that had been carved deep into her soul. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing cry tore through the night. Sarah's scream, raw and frantic, jolted him fully awake, dragging him out of the heavy fog of sleep like a man surfacing from a nightmare. Instinctively, he bolted upright, heart hammering against his ribs as adrenaline coursed through him. The warmth of her body, normally steady in sleep, now shook violently against him. Her arms flailed in the dark, and her eyes, wide and glassy, searched the empty room with terror that threatened to undo everything they had rebuilt. The sound of her voice, a mixture of panic and grief, sent shivers down his spine, echoing in his own chest, a stark reminder that scars unseen could wound as deeply as any blade. "Sarah! Sarah, it's okay. I'm here." James's voice was firm yet trembling, the raw vulnerability of fear coloring each word. He wrapped his arms tightly around her, holding her close against his chest, feeling her quiver with a tremor that was both physical and emotional. His hands moved over her back, firm, grounding as if he could press the fear out of her with the strength of his touch. He whispered her name over and over, a mantra intended to anchor her, to remind her that the shadows of the past no longer held dominion over her present. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, soaking the front of his shirt, each one a testament to nights spent alone, to years of longing, to the terror of abandonment that had haunted her since their separation. James pressed his lips to her temple, inhaling the scent of her hair, damp from perspiration, and whispered again, "I'm here. I'm not leaving you, Sarah, never again." The words were deliberate, heavy with promise and truth, but even as he spoke them, he felt a pang of guilt, sharp and insistent, reminding him of the moments he had allowed distance to fester, of the coldness he had once cloaked himself in. Her trembling began to subside slightly, though her breath remained shallow, quick, the remnants of terror still clinging to her like a shadow. James's hands, normally steady, shook faintly as he held her, unable to fully command the overwhelming surge of emotion that surged through him. Every memory of nights spent apart, every second of silence, every fearful thought he had once dismissed, now returned, magnified by the intensity of the present. He could feel the weight of responsibility settle over him, heavier than any business empire, stronger than any ambition. This was life itself, fragile and urgent, resting in his hands. Sarah's fingers, still trembling, reached instinctively for her belly, pressing against the subtle curve where their unborn child moved. James followed the gesture instinctively, covering her hands with his, feeling the tiny, almost imperceptible kick of life inside her. It was a silent, powerful reminder that despite the fear, despite the scars, despite the months of secrets, they were a family already. The life she carried was theirs, real, undeniable, and fragile. He could feel the thrum of her pulse against his palm, the soft rise and fall of her chest against his, the slight tension of every muscle still attuned to panic, and he realized that trust was as delicate as the unborn life beneath her hands. The night pressed on, heavy with quiet tension, yet broken by the rhythmic rocking of his arms, the soft murmurs of reassurance, and the faint whispers of love, that neither dared speak loudly, lest they disturb the fragile equilibrium they had just begun to establish. Each heartbeat, each shiver, each small sigh of relief became a miniature victory, a thread in the delicate tapestry they were weaving anew. James could not allow himself to relax fully, knowing that any lapse could allow the lingering shadows of fear to creep back, undermining the fragile foundation of trust and intimacy they were rebuilding. He shifted slightly, adjusting her against him, wrapping blankets more securely around her, as if physical proximity could stave off the ghosts of the past. He felt her shoulders tremble, tiny quakes that mirrored the storm that had once raged outside, and pressed a kiss to her damp hair, lingering there like a vow that could not be broken. "You are safe. We are safe," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of promise, apology, and a quiet fierceness. But even as he spoke, a flicker of doubt passed through him, a silent question that neither of them dared voice. Could they truly overcome the fears that had been embedded so deeply, that had lain dormant but potent, ready to erupt at the slightest provocation? Sarah, now calmer but still trembling, pressed her cheek to his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat as though it could anchor her, a lifeline through the waves of lingering anxiety. James could feel her small movements, the subtle twists of tension in her body, and he realized that the journey ahead would require more than protection. It would demand patience, understanding, and the courage to face the fears that had haunted her long before he had returned. He pressed her close again, inhaling the faint scent of rain-soaked hair mixed with her natural warmth, and murmured once more, "I will carry you. I will hold you. Whatever comes, we face it together." But the storm of vulnerability was not fully quelled. Outside, the city's lights flickered through sheets of rain, casting ghostly shadows that danced across the walls, echoing the uncertainty that lingered inside. Sarah's eyes, wide and glistening, searched the room, even as she pressed into him, as if expecting a phantom danger, a threat that might undo the fragile peace they had built. James felt a surge of protectiveness, a raw, unfiltered need to shield her from the world, from herself, from the fears that had once left her exposed. And in that moment, he understood that love was not merely passion or desire, it was presence, unwavering and fierce, even when the shadows of the past reached into the present. The baby kicked again, faint but insistent, a small, rhythmic protest that drew both of their attention. Sarah's hands trembled as she pressed against her belly, her breaths shallow but steadying, while James's own hands mirrored hers, protective and reverent. The life inside her was a living testament to trust, to hope, to the fragile bond that had begun to blossom between them. Each movement, each flutter, was a reminder that the stakes were higher than either of them had imagined, that fear and vulnerability could not be ignored, and that the journey ahead required more than words. It required courage, resilience, and the unwavering choice to face every night together, regardless of the shadows that might loom. Minutes stretched into an eternity, filled with soft whispers, gentle touches, and the quiet sound of two hearts learning to beat in tandem again. James held her with a tenderness that was almost feral in its intensity, refusing to let go, refusing to allow fear or memory to dictate the present. He pressed kisses into the nape of her neck, along the curve of her shoulder, and into her hair, each one a silent vow, a promise that her past would not define their future, that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a bridge to a deeper, more profound connection. Even as sleep began to return, heavy and hesitant, James remained alert, attuned to every movement, every tremor, every sound, a sentinel guarding both mother and child. Sarah, finally sinking into a fitful but calmer slumber, clung to him, as though the bond between them could anchor her through any storm, any fear, any lingering shadow. Outside, the city hummed quietly, the storm finally fading, but inside, the delicate balance of love, trust, and vulnerability hung in the air like a fragile crystal, beautiful, radiant, yet precarious, requiring constant care, attention, and unwavering devotion to survive. And as James held her through the remainder of the night, feeling the life inside her stir softly under his hands, he realized that their journey was only beginning. Fear and vulnerability were not enemies to be defeated. They were truths to be acknowledged, embraced, and navigated together. Every tear, every tremor, every whispered word of reassurance was a step forward, a brick in the foundation of a love that was unshakable only because they had chosen to face the shadows together. Yet, even in the quiet, moments before dawn, a faint, unspoken question lingered like a ghost between them. Would the fragility of trust, once broken, truly withstand the storms still to come? Or would the past rise again to challenge everything they had fought so hard to reclaim? The penthouse was quiet now, save for the faint drip of rain against the wide glass windows and the occasional distant hum of city life that barely penetrated the cocoon of warmth James and Sarah had created. The night air carried a chill, yet inside, the heat of their closeness pressed against the shadows, keeping them at bay. James held Sarah in his arms, her body curled into his side, her head resting against his chest as he ran a protective hand through her damp hair. The baby stirred gently inside her, and the subtle movements under his palm reminded him of everything he had missed, every day he had lost, every heartbeat he had been unaware of. Tonight, he promised himself, he would leave nothing unspoken. Sarah's fingers trembled against his chest, her lips pressed into the fabric of his shirt as if anchoring herself to him, drawing courage from the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Her voice, soft, trembling, and yet carrying the weight of months of secrets, finally broke the fragile silence. "James, there's so much you don't know, so much I've had to bear alone," she whispered, each word a thread weaving through the tension that had filled their nights for weeks. He tilted his head slightly, listening intently, each syllable sinking into him like ice into fire, awakening a mixture of longing, guilt, and fierce protectiveness that made his chest ache with need. I was terrified," Sarah continued, her words trembling with the honesty that had long been suppressed. "Terrified you'd moved on, that you wouldn't care, that I'd lost you forever. I didn't want to burden you with this while you were cold, distant. I thought I could handle it alone, but every day I lived with the fear that you'd never know, never forgive me for not telling you." Her voice cracked, breaking under the weight of unshed tears, and James tightened his arms around her, pressing his lips to her temple, as if he could absorb the pain into himself, shielding her from every memory of loneliness she had endured. The confession tumbled out in waves, each revelation a delicate knife cutting through the walls James had built over years of arrogance, pride, and cold detachment. She spoke of nights spent pacing her small apartment, feeling the baby stir, imagining his reaction, worrying that he would recoil from the life they had created in secret. She spoke of the empty evenings, the hollow dinners, the moments when she had touched her belly and wondered if he would ever come back, if he would ever see the truth of their love. Each admission sent a jolt of electricity through James's veins, a mixture of pain, anger, and unbearable longing that made him tremble, made him want to claim her in ways that words alone could not convey. "I can't believe you carried this alone," James murmured, his voice breaking as he kissed the trembling fingers that rested against his chest. The warmth of her skin, the subtle pulse of life beneath his hands, the vulnerability she allowed him to witness, it all struck him with the force of revelation. He had thought he knew the depth of his feelings, but this raw exposure of fear, love, and trust pierced through every layer of his carefully constructed armor. His heart pounded in response, not with the familiar rhythm of desire alone, but with a need to protect, to comfort, to reclaim every moment lost between them. Sarah's eyes searched his face in the dim light, wide and glistening, asking silently if he could forgive her, if he could understand the months of hidden struggle, if he could embrace not only her, but the life she carried, the secret that had bound them apart, and now, paradoxically, drew them together more fiercely than ever. James cupped her face in his hands, the heat of his palms against her cheeks, grounding her, and whispered, "I don't just forgive you, Sarah. I am in awe of you, of everything you've endured, of everything you've carried, and still, you're here, with me." Her lips parted slightly in a whisper of vulnerability, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The only sounds were the soft patter of rain, the faint hum of the city, and the rhythm of their joined breathing. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned into him, pressing her forehead against his chest, and he felt a tremor pass through her body. It was a quiver not of fear this time, but of relief, of trust cautiously offered, of a surrender that was both fragile and profound. James ran his fingers along her back, tracing the line of her spine through the soft fabric of her shirt, memorizing the curve of her body as though he could imprint it into his very soul. His touch was reverent, worshipful, and it sent shivers up her arms, causing her to inhale sharply, clinging to him like a lifeline in the darkness. Every sigh, every tremor of her fingers, every blink of her moist eyes became a silent conversation between them, an exchange of emotion too deep for words, yet too vital to remain unspoken. Minutes bled into hours as Sarah revealed more, her loneliness, the small joys she had taken from the life growing inside her, the quiet moments of panic when she imagined raising their child alone, the sleepless nights filled with hope and fear entwined. James listened, absorbing every confession with a raw intensity that left him both shattered and profoundly alive. He whispered her name repeatedly, kissed the lines of her neck, pressed gentle but insistent kisses across her shoulders and collarbone, marking each revelation with tenderness, letting her know, without words alone, that he would never let her endure such fear again. And then, as the night deepened and the city slept, something shifted. Their embrace grew into a night of passion, not reckless or hurried, but a slow, consuming fire that fused desire with healing, with love, with the reclamation of lost time. Each kiss, each caress, each whispered confession of love stitched together the fragments of their hearts, sealing the wounds of absence and secrecy with the heat of touch and the warmth of connection. Sarah trembled against him, her lips seeking his, her hands clutching at the fabric of his shirt, at his arms, at anything that could anchor her to the reality of this moment, of the man who now loved her with a fervor that dwarfed any past resentment. Outside, the rain fell steadily, a soft, rhythmic echo to their passion, as if the world itself paused to witness the merging of hearts long separated. Lightning briefly illuminated the sky, casting shadows across the penthouse, a reminder that even in moments of intimacy and surrender, life's storms could still rage. Yet inside, their shared warmth, their whispered confessions, their passionate reclamation of each other's bodies and souls created a sanctuary impervious to the world beyond. Every glance, every brush of skin, every heartbeat shared in the night became a pact, a promise that they would face all storms together, that fear would no longer dominate, that trust, love, and desire were now indelibly entwined. And still, amid the passion and healing, many cliffhangers lingered in the shadows of the penthouse. Sarah's eyes occasionally flicked toward the windows, a subtle, fleeting glance that betrayed the memory of old fears, while James's fingers lingered on the small curve of her belly, sensing life and vulnerability, knowing that challenges yet unknown would come to test them again. The night was not just a reclamation, it was an awakening, a prelude to trials they would face together, a reminder that love, however fierce, was never without its perils. By the time dawn's first pale light began to seep through the rain-streaked glass, they were entwined, exhausted and trembling, hearts still racing, breaths still mingling in the quiet aftermath. The city beyond remained muted, unaware of the night's revelations, unaware of the secrets revealed and passions rekindled within a penthouse that had become a crucible of truth, desire, and the fragile beginnings of a family bound by more than love, bound by shared fear, vulnerability, and an unwavering determination to never let the past dictate the future. James held Sarah close, feeling her small, steady sighs against his chest, feeling the tiny flutter of life beneath his hands, and knew with certainty that the night of truth had changed them irrevocably. Nothing could undo what had been confessed, what had been reclaimed, what had been healed. And yet, in the quiet moments before sleep fully claimed them, a single thought lingered like a whisper on the edge of consciousness. A question neither dared voice aloud. Could the delicate balance of love desire, and trust they had rebuilt, survive the next storm that fate would inevitably bring. The first pale light of morning filtered through the rain-speckled windows, casting a soft glow over the penthouse. James lay beside Sarah, still holding her close, his palm resting lightly over the swell of her belly. The quiet, after their night of confessions and passion, felt almost surreal, a fragile moment suspended between the intensity of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Yet, even in that delicate calm, James's mind raced with the knowledge that love alone would not protect them from the trials that awaited. Life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and theirs had already been forged in fire and secrecy. He watched her breathe, each shallow inhalation a reminder of the life she carried, the vulnerability she had allowed him to witness. Every glance at her face, the curve of her shoulders, the tilt of her head against the pillow, reminded him how fragile everything still was. The intimacy they had reclaimed could not erase the lingering shadows of fear and doubt that lingered in her eyes. He knew that even the smallest misstep, an offhand word, a hint of anger, a memory unspoken, could ignite insecurities long buried. And yet he also knew that shielding her from the world entirely was impossible. The battles awaiting them were bigger than the two of them alone. Society's judgment already loomed, though unspoken. A billionaire known for control and calculated decisions, now entangled with an ex-wife carrying his child, was bound to attract whispers, scrutiny, and assumptions. James had always commanded attention, but this was personal, messy, and threatening to everything he had built. He could feel it pressing against the edges of their lives, a storm ready to challenge them, and he refused to allow anyone to diminish the fragile sanctuary he and Sarah were creating. Yet the fear gnawed at him, not for himself, but for her. For the woman who had endured so much already, who had carried their child in secrecy, who had opened herself to him fully and still trembled with the vestiges of old pain. Sarah stirred beside him, blinking sleepily, the softness of her eyes betraying the faint unease she had carried even through the night. "James, do you think... can we really face this?" Her voice was small, tentative, yet threaded with the strength that had carried her through months of fear and secrecy. James pressed a kiss to her temple, holding her gaze even as his own heart throbbed with a mixture of love, worry, and determination. "We have to, Sarah, we will," he said firmly, though even he knew that words alone could not stave off the challenges ahead. Their future was uncharted, and every step carried weight. Every choice mattered. Every doubt needed to be faced together. He shifted slightly, brushing damp strands of hair from her face, tracing her cheek with his thumb, and felt the tension in her shoulders, the subtle tremor in her fingers. It was a reminder that trust, though rebuilt in part through nights of intimacy and confessions, remained delicate. He could not simply rely on passion or desire to maintain it. He had to act, to protect, to reassure, to anticipate the storms before they struck. And yet, lurking beneath even his resolve, was the truth that some battles were beyond preparation, beyond control. Life's uncertainties and fears could strike at any moment, and both of them would need to be strong enough to withstand them. The thought of impending parenthood added a weight to every glance, every touch. Sarah's body, carrying life, was a living emblem of their connection, a reminder of responsibility and vulnerability intertwined. James's mind raced with possibilities, questions unasked but urgent. Was he prepared for the sleepless nights, the endless worry, the decisions that would shape the life of their child? Could he be both protector and partner, lover and guide, without faltering under the pressures that awaited? The uncertainty pressed against him like a storm cloud, silent yet threatening, and he realized that every heartbeat, every whisper of fear had to be met with unwavering attention and love. Sarah stirred again, pressing her face into his chest, her voice barely a murmur. "I'm scared, James. What if I fail? What if we fail?" Her words, soft and vulnerable, cut through him, igniting a fierce need to reassure her, to banish her fears, to prove that their bond was stronger than every shadow of doubt. James's fingers intertwined with hers, pressing gently but firmly, a silent vow that he would never let her feel alone again. "We won't fail. Not as long as we face everything together," he whispered, letting the tremor of his own emotion seep into the promise. But even as he spoke, a nagging tension lingered, unspoken, fragile and insistent, reminding him that love alone would be tested by life's relentless challenges. The city beyond the windows remained muted, the rain now a steady drizzle, yet the storm within the penthouse persisted. Both James and Sarah were acutely aware of the delicate balance they had achieved, the thin line between safety and chaos, between trust and fear. Every heartbeat, every glance at her belly, every soft sigh of the child moving within reminded them that the stakes were higher than ever. Their love was no longer a matter of desire or longing. It had become a responsibility, a shared mission to protect, nurture, and endure. And in that quiet understanding, the air between them thickened with anticipation, the possibility of joy and heartbreak intertwined, each waiting silently for the next moment to define it. James shifted closer, pressing his forehead to hers, feeling the warmth of her skin and the subtle movements beneath his hands. "We've fought for this," he murmured, voice low and intense, "but the world isn't done testing us yet. Every glance, every judgment, every unexpected challenge will come, but I promise you, whatever happens, we fight together. Not just for us, but for the life we've created." The intensity of his gaze, the firmness of his hand on her belly, the steadying rhythm of his breath against her skin became a lifeline, a fragile but unbreakable thread tethering them to the certainty of their shared commitment. Sarah's eyes shimmered with a mixture of fear and hope, tears threatening again, but held back by the raw honesty between them. Her hand rested atop his, fingers trembling slightly, as if anticipating the battles yet to come. I want to believe," she whispered, voice cracking, "but sometimes the fear is too much." James pressed his lips to her knuckles, inhaling the faint scent of her shampoo mixed with rain-soaked hair, and whispered, "Then let me carry it for you. Let me be your strength when you falter, your shield when the world strikes, your anchor when the storms rise." But even in the tenderness of his vow, he could feel the tension coiling around them, a silent storm of doubt and challenge, waiting for the first misstep. The day progressed slowly, each passing hour layered with anticipation. Every knock at the door, every message on his phone, every subtle hint of outside scrutiny felt magnified against the backdrop of their fragile sanctuary. James noticed it in Sarah's posture, the slight tension in her jaw, the way she flinched at minor disturbances, a residue of fear that no night of intimacy alone could erase. He realized that love, no matter how deep, would need constant defense, vigilance, and unwavering communication. They had crossed the threshold of trust, but the road ahead was still riddled with unseen obstacles, waiting for the moment they least expected. Even as they shared quiet moments, holding hands across the breakfast table, glancing at each other in silent acknowledgement of shared devotion, the spectre of societal judgment and personal doubt loomed. Friends and colleagues might not understand the depth of their bond, the sacrifices endured, or the intensity of the secrets kept. The world outside could be harsh, cruel, and unforgiving, and James knew that he would have to shield Sarah from more than physical dangers. He would have to fight perceptions, assumptions, and subtle attacks that threatened the security they were rebuilding. Night fell again, the rain returning with a persistent rhythm against the windows, a reminder that storms were cyclical, relentless, and impossible to predict. James and Sarah sat together on the sofa, blankets wrapped around both of them, hearts still racing from the intensity of the day's confessions and shared intimacy. Every glance at her belly reminded them of the life dependent on them, of the stakes that could not be ignored. Every brush of fingers, every whispered promise, every soft murmur of love was a small defiance against the pressures awaiting them beyond these walls. The tension remained, unspoken yet palpable. Every shadow cast by the flickering city lights, every faint creak of the penthouse floor, every subtle noise beyond their sanctuary reminded them that peace was fragile. And as James held her close, feeling the subtle shifts of the child within, he understood fully that love, even when reclaimed and fortified, could not alone guarantee safety. They would be tested again, by fear, by doubt, by the unpredictability of life itself. Yet in that realization lay a determination, a quiet but unyielding resolve. Together they would endure. Together they would fight. Together they would protect the fragile, radiant life that had already begun to define them both. And even as darkness pressed in around them, even as the rain traced silent patterns against the glass, both James and Sarah felt it, the unspoken acknowledgement that love was only the beginning, that trust was a delicate but necessary armor, and that every heartbeat, every whisper, every shared moment was preparation for the storms yet to come. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the fierce bond forged in secrecy, vulnerability, and defiance of fear. Inside, their hearts beat in quiet unison, ready to face whatever challenges the world would throw at them, knowing that the life they had created, both their love and their unborn child, was worth every battle, every tear, every moment of uncertainty that lay ahead. The city lay bathed in the soft glow of lights that reflected off slick streets, rain long gone, but leaving behind a shimmering sheen like liquid silver. From his penthouse, James looked out at the expanse below, the streets humming quietly with life that seemed distant, yet intimately connected to their own cocoon. Beside him, Sarah leaned against his chest, her hand resting protectively over the gentle curve of her belly, feeling for the life inside her as he traced slow, reverent circles along the same spot. Weeks had passed since the stormy night of confessions, the long hours of shared fears, tears and whispers. Weeks had passed since they had faced the uncertainty of their fragile trust. Yet the memory of those dark nights lingered, a reminder of what they had overcome together. Sarah's eyes, bright and glistening, followed the faint movements beneath her palm as their child shifted and kicked, sending subtle ripples across her rounded belly. Each soft thump was a heartbeat echoing in tandem with her own, a rhythm that filled the room with hope, with life, with the tangible proof of a bond that had endured storms far larger than either of them could have imagined. James tightened his hold around her, pressing a kiss to the crown of her damp hair, inhaling the scent that was uniquely hers, a mixture of rain, soft perfume, and the quiet strength that had carried her through months of isolation and secrecy. The warmth of their closeness seemed to push back against the chill of the city outside, leaving only the heat of love, the steady pulse of protection, and the quiet hum of anticipation for the life they had yet to fully meet. This little one," Sarah murmured, her voice soft, quivering with awe and lingering disbelief. "I never thought, after everything, we'd get here." Her hand squeezed gently over James's, and he felt the same mixture of wonder, disbelief, and overwhelming devotion that had gripped him the moment he first realized she carried their child. The weeks of fear, of distance, of unspoken doubts, all of it had led to this delicate moment, where hope seemed almost tangible, where love had proven itself stronger than every obstacle the world had thrown at them. James pressed a lingering kiss to her temple, letting his lips rest there for a long moment, as if imprinting his presence, his protection, and his promise onto her very being. "We're here, Sarah. We survived the storm, the secrets, the fear, and now we have this. We have them. We have us." His voice, low and firm yet trembling with emotion, carried weight, each word a vow, each syllable a pledge of devotion that had grown from the ashes of the pain they had endured. He felt her head tilt slightly, pressing against his chest, eyes closed in quiet acceptance and relief. And in that moment, time seemed to still, the world narrowing down to the gentle rise and fall of her breath and the subtle movements of life beneath his hands. Tears slid slowly down Sarah's cheeks, leaving trails that glimmered in the soft nursery light. She pressed a hand to her lips, stifling a sob of joy, of relief, of the profound gratitude that she had survived the storm not alone, but in the arms of the man who had once walked away, but had now returned fully, completely, and without reservation. James wiped the tears gently with his thumb, his own eyes reflecting the same raw emotion, the same deep awe at the miracle they had created together. Every fear they had faced, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt or longing, it all culminated in this fragile, luminous moment where hope, life, and love intertwined seamlessly. They moved closer to the center of the nursery, where soft lamplight painted the walls in gentle amber hues, casting shadows that seemed almost protective, wrapping the room in warmth. James's hands continued to glide along Sarah's belly, pressing softly as if he could physically convey every ounce of love, devotion, and promise into the tiny life growing within. "Can you feel them moving?" he asked softly, voice low yet full of awe. Sarah nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears, eyes bright and shining. "I feel them, and I feel you. I feel us, James. I feel everything we fought for." Her words, simple yet profound, reverberated through him. The battles, the fear, the sleepless nights, they had all led to this singular truth. That love, once tempered by hardship, secrecy, and vulnerability, had emerged not just intact, but stronger, fiercer, unbreakable. James's chest tightened, a deep sense of awe and reverence filling every fiber of his being. He lowered his forehead to hers, letting their breaths mingle, letting the quiet hum of the city and the subtle heartbeat of their unborn child form the backdrop to the most intimate and sacred connection they had ever shared. Minutes passed in silence, filled only by the gentle flutter of life within Sarah, the quiet hum of their shared heartbeat, and the unspoken understanding that nothing could undo what had been forged in the fire of truth and reconciliation. James's mind wandered briefly to the nights of fear, the hours of distance, the moments when anger and longing had collided in a tempest they thought might never end. But those moments now seemed distant, almost insignificant in the shadow of the triumph of love, of family, of a future painstakingly claimed from the ruins of secrecy. "I never imagined this," Sarah whispered again, her voice almost a breath, trembling with both disbelief and wonder. "After all, after everything, we'd really make it here, together, and with them." She gestured to her belly, her eyes luminous with emotion, a mixture of awe, pride, and fierce protective love. James pressed his lips to the crown of her head again, letting his arms tighten around her, as if he could shield both mother and child from the uncertainty of the world beyond their sanctuary. "This is only the beginning," he said softly, voice low and measured, yet carrying the same intensity that had guided him through every storm of the past weeks. "We've survived what many thought impossible. We've faced our fears, our doubts, our worst moments, and we're still standing. I swear, Sarah, I will never let anything touch you or them. Never." The vow, simple yet monumental, hung in the quiet air, resonating in a way that words alone could not convey. The nursery seemed to echo with the weight of their promise, the faint whispers of hope, and the quiet anticipation of a life yet to come. Sarah tilted her face up, tears glistening as she pressed her lips to his. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it. I feel your heart with me, with us." Her words, soft and resonant, carried the power of every struggle endured, every night spent in fear, every moment they had rediscovered each other and the love that had never truly left. James kissed her again, lingering, reverent, as if sealing the truth of their bond onto her very soul, onto the life that would soon join them fully in the world. The moment stretched, tender and intimate, filled with the quiet music of shared heartbeats and whispered promises. Every touch, every sigh, every glance was a reinforcement of the unshakable foundation they had built, one that no fear, no distance, and no secret could ever undo. The trials they had faced were now memories, shadows of a past that had forged their hearts into unbreakable armor, tempered with trust, devotion, and desire. The city outside might continue its indifferent hum, but inside the nursery, life itself seemed to pulse with the triumph of love, a living testament to their journey and their victory over uncertainty. As the night deepened, Sarah pressed her head to James's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, the soft, reassuring press of his hand over her belly, the promise of protection and devotion that had been forged through trials and tribulations. He pressed a final kiss to her forehead, lingering in the quiet intimacy, and whispered, "We are stronger than we ever imagined. Our love, our family, nothing can break us now." And in that soft, golden-lit nursery, surrounded by the quiet city and the subtle, miraculous life moving within Sarah, they finally let themselves believe in a future filled with hope, with passion, with unwavering devotion. Tears of joy, quiet laughter, and whispered words of love filled the room as they imagined the days ahead, the sleepless nights, the first cries, the first steps, the countless shared moments of happiness and wonder. Every fear they had faced, every secret endured, every moment of despair had led to this. A love that triumphed, a family united, and hearts finally aligned in perfect harmony. James held Sarah close as the first soft kicks of their child continued beneath his hands, and together they whispered promises into the night, into the quiet, into the unshakable certainty of the life they had created and the love they had fought to reclaim. The storm that had once threatened to break them had instead forged them into something unbreakable, and as the city slept, James and Sarah finally allowed themselves to rest. Hearts full, souls intertwined, and their future waiting, bright and unstoppable. The secret that had once shattered James's world had become the foundation for a love stronger than either had ever known. Trust rebuilt, hearts healed, a life created and protected, and the courage to face all truths together. Their triumph was not just survival, but the radiant, undeniable power of love, realized in its most complete, most tender, and most unbreakable form. And as the night slowly gave way to dawn, the first hints of sunlight reflected off the rain-slicked streets below, casting the nursery in gentle, warm hues. A perfect, serene, and eternal promise of everything they had fought for and everything they had yet to become. Wow! What a story! If your heart is racing and your emotions are overflowing, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who loves intense stories. Comment below and tell me, how did this story make you feel? And of course, make sure you subscribe to Beyond Color Stories so you never miss a single twist, secret, or moment of passion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.